Defeating the Time Slug is less about dealing huge amounts of damage all at once, and it's really more about just controlling every bit of the fight on every turn. So in this video, we're going to talk strategy, and we're going to talk the Time Slug, and we're going to look at all the different ways that you can control the fight so that even if you don't have huge amounts of strength scaling, you can survive long enough to take the Time Slug down to 0 and move forward. Let's take a look at the Time Warp mechanic. Anytime this counter hits 12, your turn ends immediately and the Time Eater gains 2 strength. This means that every turn needs to be meticulously planned. You don't want to hit 12 before you've played any of your block cards, and you don't want to run out of cards with the counter on 11. So look at every card in your hand every turn and make that plan, and keep an eye on this counter as you're playing. Time Eater rotates between 2 main attacks and 1 buff. The first main attack hits you 3 times for a multiple of damage based on your ascension. There's a big attack that hits you once for a large amount of damage and also gives you a draw reduction on your next turn. Again, this is where that Time Warp can really kind of start to mess with things, because if you left it on 6 and you only draw 5 cards next turn, now you're going to leave your counter on 11. Finally, there's a buff effect where the Time Eater actually blocks and then inflicts debuffs against you, being vulnerable, weak, and possibly frail depending on your ascension. After the Time Eater goes below 50% health, on its next turn it will immediately use this haste skill. It's going to heal back to 50% of its health no matter how far down you get it, so even if you get it to 1 and you run out of cards, it's going to heal itself all the way back to 50% of its max. It's going to remove all debuffs, and if you're on high ascension, it's also going to gain block. It's really important to keep debuff cards handy so you can keep dropping the Time Eater's attack power down to minimal amounts or next to nothing. Or keep finding ways to increase your block abilities. As you can see here, I've got the kunai, which just keeps on expanding my dexterity every time I play 3 attacks per turn. I have 1 shiv already per turn, so 2 more attacks and I start building up more block. And as you can see, the block just keeps kind of snowballing, and I keep applying weak, which then of course keeps lowering the Time Eater's ability to deal any kind of damage. And that's the majority of what you're going to be doing. You're going to control the fight more than deal tons of damage. And when you're fighting the Time Slug, it really is more important to control every aspect of the fight than to be able to deal a ton of damage all at once. As we move on to phase 2 of the Time Eater fight, it's time to write caw caw down in the comments section, drink your cultist potion, and while you're there, go ahead and subscribe. As soon as you see this symbol over the Time Eater's head, that means that you have taken it below half health, and on its next turn, it is going to immediately delete all debuffs and heal itself back up to half of its full max. It's really important here to end the turn with giving yourself plenty to play next time, because you're going to have to enter a second setup phase. You need to reapply vulnerable and weak. Find some way to maybe build up some extra block, or do something to set up your next turn, and leave that counter as low as possible so that you can do everything you need to set up and end phase 2 as quickly as possible. Now, of course, there's always the possibility that you can do 240 damage in 1 turn, and if that's the case, do everything you can to get there as quickly as you can. It's also very helpful to keep some of your exhausting cards for phase 2. Keep a Terror, a Malaise, a Disarm, any of those cards that are going to reapply those buffs. Try to keep an extra one for phase 2, because a lot of times it's really easy to get through phase 1, and then you get to phase 2 and you're not dealing any damage, and you don't have any block, and you don't have any way to stop the Time Eater, so you really, everything falls apart as soon as it heals back to 240, because he's hitting hard again. It's also important, if you're relying on Catalyst and Poison, to remember that all the poison that you have applied goes away when that rebuff turn happens. It might be a good idea to keep your Crippling Cloud, or to keep an extra Catalyst or something, because once again, you've got 240 damage you have to do in a matter of just a few turns. Remember that you have all of Act 3 to know if you're going to fight the Time Eater and to find the stuff that you absolutely need in order to win. You know, sometimes it helps if you have the Velvet Choker that restricts you to only 6 cards per turn, so you can kind of manipulate things even a little bit better, play 6 cards every turn, and then you're not going to have to worry about having extra cards or not having enough cards. Last but not least, make sure to try and stay away from playing the spammy kind of cards. If you're playing 12 shivs per turn, make sure you have some kind of strength gain, or a shuriken, or something, because 4 damage 10 times is only 40. So you need to make sure you have block, and you have some other kind of mitigation in there. Enjoy the game, beat the time eater, go back to floor 1, and keep moving forward.